Alright, welcome aboard the Tidal Fox. For this voyage, we'll be going over the deck profile of Captain Agatharod Horror Mill. Technically, this is not one of my pirate decks, but it keeps the idea of pirates alive, and Captain Agatharod himself is a pirate. So last week we went over the waifu of Admiral Brass Unsinkable and her self-mill deck, because I mentioned it's rather hard to consistently win through milling 99 cards 3 times, as opposed to milling 86 cards once. So, this is not the husbando. It's kind of like an uncle. Husbando's Ramirez de Pietro Pillager. That is the husbando. But this is a close second. If Ramirez didn't exist, it would be husbando. Now, to go over the goal of this deck, it is a mill deck. It is to get as many cards in my opponent's graveyard as I can and prevent them from using it. How do you prevent people from using graveyard cards? Well, you hope they don't have recursion, or you run Bajuka's Bog, the new Bogwart Trawler coming out in Modern Horizons 3, Nautiloid Vessel, or something like, what is it, Warding Stone? Weathering Stone? Or Kunos, Hound Kunos the Hound. Forget what he's the Hound of. He prevents you from removing cards from graveyards, or targeting cards in graveyards with effects. But I have a different way of doing that. So we're going to go over to Captain Agathron and go over the commander, the abilities, and what I'm hoping to get going with this commander in this deck. So Captain Agatharod is a CMC 5 creature. He's 3 of any mana, a blue and a black. He's a 3/6 legendary horror pirate. His abilities are horrors you control have menace. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. And at the beginning of your end step, choose target artifact or creature in an opponent's graveyard that was put there from their library this turn. Put it onto the battlefield under your control. So you can see that our main way to mill is going to be combat. We have some ways to facilitate combat. We give all horrors, including himself, menace. So theoretically, I could win through commander damage, but he's a 3/6. And that's about 7 hits of commander, which by the time I'm getting up there to 4 or 5, they probably have a way to deal with my menace Nagatharod. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player's going to mill. Like I said, we're going to go through the combat way to mill mostly. We do have some other ways to mill that just really incentivize people to not play the game. But what's important about this is a triggered ability. So, if I can get more triggers of it, I can have them milled twice. And the final ability, the key ability, is how we prevent people from using their graveyard by taking creatures and artifacts out of it. But we can only take one. We can only take it from an opponent's graveyard if it was put there this turn. But the key word there is put there this turn. Because if you have cards that say mill X, or cards that have not been errated from saying put X cards top of the library in the graveyard to mill X, they still were put there this turn. So that's where he's going to come in. So, that being said, we've gone over the commander, we've gone over the deck identity. We're going to start going through these cards. We're just going to go down the list this time. We're going to go Planeswalkers next. So from Captain Agatharod, we're going to keep within the blue-black identity. We're going to have Jace the Perfected Mind. He is the completed Jace from, I want to say, March of Phyrexia. He is 2, a blue, and a blue Phyrexian mana, which means you can pay him for 4 mana, 2 of which has to be blue, or 3 mana and 2 health. Now, because he's completed, if you use the Phyrexian health instead of blue mana, instead of coming in with 5 loyalty counters, he'll come in with 3. And that's not bad, that's fine. He comes a little cheaper, you get access to him. His loyalty abilities are as follows. For +1, until the next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -3, -0. So if you do play him low, you protect him. You play him at turn 3 or turn 2, depending on your mana ramp. He's protected from the 1 creature an opponent might have. He's going to have 3 health, 3 loyalty counters, so he can't die that easily, but still pretty easily. You can -2 immediately, put him down to 1 to make a target player mill 3 cards. And then if a graveyard has 20 more cards in it, you get to draw 3. Otherwise, you just draw a single card. Now that's great for this deck because that is 3 free cards in the graveyard and any amount of hand advantage. Like, that's helpful because I do have to use my mana on my cards, but I get your cards for free. And then for -X, so even if you completed him -2 and you get -1, You can -3 immediately. The target player mills 3 times X cards. Essentially, that means for each loyalty point you spend, they mill 3 cards. So you spend 5, they mill 15. You spend 1, they mill 3. And that is super helpful because that makes that player mill a lot, which gives us a higher chance to hit something helpful for us or painful for them with Captain Agatharod's ability to take control of things from graveyards. All right, I'm next going to go to creatures. Now, this is where the deck kind of gets interesting. Now, I said this was a combat mill focus with other fun ways to mill, and the way I've designed this deck for the combat is not to hit with a lot of big horrors. It's to make one decent horror get through and trigger that 6 or 7 times. 6 or 7 is a little on the hopeful end, but as we go through the deck, we'll see just how efficiently and effective that could be. So the first creature, Auton Soldier. 4 and 2 blues. He's a 0/0 artifact creature alien soldier. Now, you may have experience with 0/0 artifact creatures like Phyrexian Metamorph. You know this is going to be a copier, a shapeshifter. So what it does is when it enters the battlefield, you may have it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it is not a legendary, and it is an artifact condition with other types, and it has Myriad. Now, this is why it's worth the 6 mana to play it. Because of that Myriad and because it's not legendary. Now you can get Spark Double at 4 mana. It makes it not legendary. It gets a 1/1 counter. That makes my Nagatharod that I copy a 4/7. But this would be a 3/6 with Myriad, meaning it'll swing at every single opponent with 3 Nagatharods. That plus normal Nagatharod, because you'd have to target it, means if one horror hits one person, that person has to mill cards equal to the damage they took from the horror, times 4 for each individual trigger. Now, unfortunately, Myriad does remove them at the end of combat. So that you get the mills, but you only get the 1 pluck, which is a little hindrance. But you still have the second Nagatharod, so you do get that second pluck. Moving on, a classic horror, still a little on the more expensive end, Consuming Aberration. 3, a blue and a black. It's a horror with star power toughness. Its power toughness are equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. Now, like I just said, if those Myriad Nagatharods do hit, that is 3 times 4. That is 12 cards milled off of 3 damage. And that's 12 cards each, which would make this a 36. In a perfect world. But whenever an opponent casts a spell, each opponent reveals cards on top of their library until they reveal a land card, and they put those cards in their graveyard. Now, this is not a mill. This does not work with cards that say, if your opponent would mill a card. But this does work with cards that say, if a card is put there from their library. You see, this is where the idea is going. Up next, we have Fleet Swallower. Now, Fleet Swallower has been errata to say mills half of their library rounded up. So that works for other cards. But for the most part, it's a boss monster. It's kind of a king in the deck. It is 5 and 2 blue at 7 mana, but it is a 6/6. Hello, Jasmine. Welcome aboard. We are going over a deck profile. We are doing Captain Agatharod Horror Mill. It is not pirate themed, it is horror themed, but it's still piracy at its core. So, Fleet Swallower, when it attacks, it doesn't need to do counter, it's just a tap trigger. Target player will mill half their library. You can double this with an Auton Soldier Myriad, doubling it. You could double it with a Lithoform Engine or a Stronic Resonator, making them mill 3/4 of their deck. This is just to get more cards in for Nagatharod to choose from. Now, to really utilize those cards, we're running Geth, Lord of the Vault. He doesn't fit the types, but he fits the theme. At 4 mana and 2 black, he's a 5/5 legendary Phyrexian zombie with Intimidate. He has the ability of, for X and black, you put an artifact or creature card with mana value X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Then that player mills X more cards. Now, this is important because, well, one, you get to put something there that was there for more than one turn. Nagatharod's only going to hit things that were milled this turn during your turn. Geth will target any card at any time as long as you can afford it. And then they mill again. You do this during your turn, and you get twice the targets for Nagatharod. Next, we have Gollum the Scheming Guide. This little guy was a funny card who came out in the Lord of the Rings set. Legendary Halfling Horror at 1 and a black. He is a 2/1. And when he attacks, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, and you get to put them back in any order. You choose land or non-land. An opponent will then guess whether the top card of your library is the card you've mentioned, land or non-land. You then reveal that card. If they guessed it right, you remove Gollum from combat. He can't be blocked. He takes no damage. Otherwise, you draw a card, and Gollum can't be blocked this turn. Now, this one is fun for the deck idea because, one, it gives you that sense of divine top. It lets you shuffle and stack your deck the way you need to, at least a small part of it. And 2, there's no reason not to swing with him every turn. Either he'll be removed from combat and safe, or he can be blocked and you get to draw a card that you just put on top of your library. And it puts your opponents into a guessing game. It makes them have to think and distracts them from their plays. And then next up, we'll go through Grell Philosopher. This is a 2 and a blue, 3 mana horror wizard. Power 1, toughness 4. When it enters the battlefield at the beginning of your upkeep, each horror you control gains the activated abilities of a target artifact in opponent control until end of turn. You may spend blue mana as though a mana of any color to activate those abilities. This card is in here because what's the most common artifacts people run? Mana rocks. Your soul rings, your arcane siggets, your mana vault. I can't afford a mana vault. Not everyone has a mana vault. But if your opponent has a mana vault, you now have 6 of them. For every horror you have, they're all now mana vaults. You got a small horror token that you don't really want to swing with? That's fine. You make 2 colorless mana off it. They had an arcane sigget, you get 1 colored mana. Grell Philosopher allows you to make so many fun plays that you couldn't afford otherwise because your opponent could afford those plays. Next, we have Hell's Caretaker. Now, this card is a bit of a wild card in the deck. It's not always helpful, but when it is helpful. This card is a 4 mana, 3 and a black, 1/1 horror. Now, the old printing just says summon Hell's Caretaker, but if we take a look at the new printing, it's been errata to say horror. What you do is you tap it and you sacrifice a creature. You then return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. But you may only do this during your upkeep, and you may only do it once. So after you untap it, you can then shuffle a creature back. You can get rid of a token, bring back something important. If you lost your Nagathorod, you can choose to send in the graveyard, bring them back. You can bring back your Auton soldiers. You can bring back anything you need to. Now, this is part of a fun combo with the artifacts using Thornbite Staff that we'll get to as we go over the artifacts and go over the combos. But for now, we're using this to kind of shuffle cards from our graveyard and our field. Up next, Keeper of the Keys. Now, this is here because, one, I like the Monarch keyword. I love Monarch. It's a fun extra little rule added to the games. And I think adding rules to the game is kind of fun. I like to play white too. Don't get mad at me. What this is here for is not just because you become the Monarch, you get to draw during your end step. It allows you to make your creatures unblockable. And as we said, Captain Nagathorod, this style of mill that we're going for, is a combat-focused style of mill. While it may not be 1,000 little 1/1s or 6 8/8s swinging to mill that much, it's going to be 1 5/5s swinging and making a mill 4 or 5 times for that 1 damage. Thank you for the follow. So, Keeper of the Keys is there to make sure that we can get that combat in for free. We have other ways to do it. Nagathorod gives Menace, Rogue's Passage Classic gives Unblockable, but for 4 mana. This one's a little better, and it helps with hand size, but it does make us a target, and it does put the Monarch in the game. So, after that, because I just mentioned we're the target, we have Kira the Great Glass Spinner. She is a 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue legendary spirit with power toughness 2/2. This creature has flying, and it gives all creatures you control the ability. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, you counter that spell or ability. Now, this is my protection. This stops anything that isn't a board wipe. Any targeted removal, any silence, any aura, polymorph. This will protect my creatures from that. But it also is Shroud. It protects it from my spells or abilities too. So if I have Kira out, I have Nagathorod out, I can't really have it. I can't really have Auton Soldier or something copy it because it is targeting it. So I do have to be careful about when I play Kira and what I want to do after I have played Kira. So this is my best protection for my main board, but you do have to play around it yourself. Yeah, I usually every Monday I like to start by going over a different deck, and then I like to go into what I call goofy magic card time, where I bring up a magic card I like and I have goofy things we do about it just for a minute or two. They may not be ways to win, but they are hilarious things you can do with it that just irritate your opponents. Last week we went over Ixalan Pirates, 4 tribe, 3 colors. That is on my YouTube. We'll go over that again in a little bit if you guys want. But for right now, we're just going to go over this opposite deck, where instead of mill myself, I'm going to mill my opponents. And then we'll transition to other Magic talk afterwards. Let's see. Up next, we got Mind Flayer. Now, this was a fun horror from the D&D set. I love D&D. I love the intricacies of the monsters and kind of how they interact with the environments there. And the environment this one's interacting with is my opponent's board. Now, most of what I have interacts with their graveyard or their deck, but Mind Flayer coming in, that's what's going to target their board and really have to make them think about what I want to do and what they want to do with what they have left. This is a 5-mana creature at 3 and 2 blue. He is a horror, so if it's the Typal, he gets the menace, and he has 3/3. Just a standard card, a little expensive for his stats. But the effect is when he enters the battlefield, you gain control of target creature for as long as you control Mind Flayer. Now, that is a triggered ability. That can be Stronic Resonator, that can be Light the Aforementioned, that can be Roaming Throned, and that can be copied with Auton Soldier, or other ways to copy it. So that's just going to start taking things off their board. Things that they thought were safe because they weren't in their deck or in their graveyard, they're going to come and hit me. They're going to come to my side of the field. Up next, we're going to go back to their deck. We're going to run Phoenix, God of Deception. Now, I love these gods. I love the monocolored gods. I love the dual-colored gods. I love all the gods, banned or not banned. This is the black-blue dual-color god. He is an enchantment, and he is a creature. He is doubly weak to removal, but he does have indestructible. He is, once again, 5 mana. I consider 5 mana a little expensive for most cards in the decks and the way I like to play, but 4 to 5 mana is a generally good place to have kind of your boss monsters, kind of your main idea. 3 mana is great if you can get everything going at 3 mana cards and lower, but 4 or 5 you're going to start seeing some good effects, and they're kind of worth their cost. He is a 4/7, meaning he is hard to remove and can do some damage, but he is not a creature unless your devotion to blue or black is less than 7. Now, devotion is the pips, the colors you see on the card. Here, he has 1 blue pip, 1 black pip. He himself considers that devotion to be 2 out of 7. Nagatharod, 1 black, 1 blue, that's 2. Auton Soldier, 2 blue pips, that's 2 devotion, because it is blue and black is less than 7, not blue or black. So, while he's not a creature, he is still an enchantment, so he is still targetable, but he is indestructible. His effect, and why you mostly want him as an enchantment, but he's still good as a creature, is he gives your other creatures, target creature puts the top X cards of his or her library into his graveyard, where X is equal to this creature's toughness. Now, he has been errated to say mills X cards, which is super helpful for the deck idea, because certain cards only work off mill. Once again, Nagatharod works off cards that were just put there. So the old version or the new version, it still works for Nagatharod. And what's really important about that mill that he gives, because while I said this is a combat one, our powers are a little weak. He's a 4/7. Nagatharod's a 3/6. They tend to have stronger Hell's Caretaker. Not Hell's Caretaker. I thought I just saw one. Gruff Philosopher is a 1/4. We tend to be tougher than we are strong. And milling based off that toughness goes a long way in this deck. Moving on, we have, honestly, probably my 3rd favorite non-commander pirate card, Pirated Copy. When this came out, I will never stop talking about Pirated Copy. Before, we only had Protean Raider. It was red, blue, and 1 colorless mana. It was a 2/3. You had to attack with it, and it turned into a copy of target creature. But that's it. It was just that creature. With Pirated Copy, it's a little more expensive. It's 4 colors and 1 blue. Having just 1 color pip isn't that bad. It's a shapeshifter and a pirate at 0/0. and when it enters, it's a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's also a pirate in addition to its other types. So it doesn't lose that piracy type if you need the typal, and I love just having pirates in general. I'm the pirate guy. And it gives it the other effect of, whenever this creature, or any creature with the same name deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. That's super helpful because if you copy their commander, you're going to draw a card when they swing with it. You copy your own commander, you're going to draw a card when you swing with it. You copy a board standard card, like for red, Dockside Extortionist. If they deal combat damage with it, and you're running with a red table, that's a lot of draws. It's got the same name. But it doesn't make it non-legendary. So there is, if you copy your Captain Agatharod, it's going to die. One of them will die because the legendary rule is in effect. You can only have one of each copy of a legendary card on the field at a time. So with Pirate Copy, you don't get around that. And that's a little worrisome, but we do have ways around that because of how we wanted to play the game. Up next, we have Roaming Throne. It is a 4-mana artifact creature. It is 4/4. It is a very fun Stronic Resonator replacement, or well, not replacement, supplement, and it's a very nice way to do sort of panharmonicon of triggers, doubling those effects. Now this works best in Typal decks. It has Ward 2, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Roaming Throne is now also that creature type, and seeing as we're doing Typal Horror, we're gonna want to become a horror. It'll get menace. It has the word 2. It'll mill that many cards if it deals damage to an opponent by combat specifically. Because you can do effect damage, you can ping them, but you need to do combat damage in this deck. And if a trigger ability of a horror would trigger, it triggers an additional time. Now, we've gone over like half of the cards in the creatures. What triggered abilities do we have of horrors? Well, we have Mind Flayer. That steals 2 cards now. We have Growl Philosopher. It'll target 2 artifacts to get all the abilities of. You can choose what you want to use. We have Consuming Aberration. Whenever you cast a spell, they have to mill until they hit land twice. Captain Agatharod. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills as many cards. Whenever means trigger. So that happens twice. At the beginning of your end step, that's also a trigger. It triggers at the beginning of a phase. So Roaming Throne allows you to get a lot of value off of the triggers. Now, the next card isn't a trigger, but it is a legendary rule. Well, it's a legendary rule breaker. It's Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. 3 colors and a blue for 4 mana total, a 3/1 legendary human rogue. Sakashima may enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has her other abilities. Those abilities are, the legend rule does not apply to permanents you control, and she also has partner. Now, the partner's not helpful. She's not our commander. We don't need another color. We could, but it's less helpful. What's important is that legend rule and that shapeshift. So, the legend rule prevents Pirate Copy from dying if I make it a copy of Nagatharod, or if I make a copy of Phoenix, because I can have more than one legend on the field of the same name. And she can become another legend of the same name, thereby becoming a Nagatharod, making that an extra trigger of whenever a horror deals combat damage, making that an extra trigger of taking an artifact or creature from an opponent's graveyard during my end step. The idea I went with was copy Nagatharod, hit him once with something that hurts, and then take as much as I can. Now, to deal with them having a board and them still having some stuff that's kind of an issue for me and that I wasn't able to effectively deal with, we run Sludge Monster. Sludge Monster is, again, a 5 mana. This deck ended up being a little curving at the 5 mana point, which is fine. We don't run a small amount of lands in this deck like one of my other decks that we'll do at a later date. But it does have 2 blue pips, and the more specific a mana cost is, the harder it is to cast. But it's not impossible to cast. It's just a little tougher. It is a 5/5 horror, so it is worth the stats. It is worth the cost. Its ability makes it cheap for its cost. Whenever Sludge Monster enters the battlefield or declares an attack, put a slime counter on up to 1 target creature. Oh, an other target creature, not itself. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base toughness and power 2/2. Now, we're all horrors. If the slime counter gets put on us, they have a way to shuffle counters. It doesn't affect us. But they get bears. They just get bears. They lose all abilities and they get 2/2s. They have bears. They're already running Kuro, the Bear King. Cool. Their bears are now slimy and wet and gross. But so we're going to skip down a bit because Sludge Monster pairs really nicely, like cheese and grapes, with Toxrill the Corrosive. Now, this 7 mana, 7/7, 5 colorless and 2 black, is quite literally living up to the name of horror, or toxic, depending on which joke you prefer better. He is a legendary slug horror, and at the beginning of each end step, not just yours, but pod member 1, pod member 2, pod member 3, pod member 4, you put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Each creature you don't control gets -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with the slime counter on it dies, you make a 1/1 black slug creature token. For a blue and a black, you can sacrifice that slug to draw a card. So you're essentially making clue tokens that let you draw a card with the power and toughness, and you're weakening your opponent's cards. Now, with Sludge Monster, which will slowly put slime counters on things, he makes them 2/2s and they lose their abilities, like Indestructible. And even then, Indestructible doesn't stop this combo, because as they're now 2/2s with these slime counters on them, Toxrill at the beginning of each end step puts an additional slime counter on them, and they get -1 for each slime counter, meaning you only need 2 slime counters to kill any creature in the game that you don't control. If your opponent's also running a Toxrill, your horrors are the ones that aren't 2/2s. His creatures are 2/2s. Or their creatures are 2/2s. So this card, plus Sludge Monster, allows you to keep your opponent's boards low or empty. Now, hopefully you're not running against the Sacrifice combo or something, or a deck that likes their cards to die, because you're just helping them out. And maybe you can parlay that into a deal and have them attack the other guy. But I digress. Moving on, Spark Double. Another classic shapeshifter. 4 mana, 3 and a blue, 0/0 illusion. This is one of the best shapeshifters because he comes in as a copy of any creature or planeswalker, and he is not a legendary. And if he comes as a creature, he gets a 1/1 counter on it. If it's a planeswalker, he gets an additional loyalty counter past what is printed on the card. Spark Double is truly the one that's worth the mana, and honestly, if he was worth 6 mana, I'd still play him. Moving on, another form of protection for the deck. We got Spellskite. This is a classic protection for 2 mana. It's a 0/4. It can block. It's a horror. It's an artifact creature. But for blue mana or 2 health, you change the target of any spell or ability to Spellskite. Your commander's going to get path to exiled. You're going to get hit with a dam or a chaos warp. You make it hit Spellskite instead. Your opponent's going to buff their creature. You make it hit Spellskite instead. Spellskite gets to put the board into chaos and turmoil, so they have to just bite the bullet and waste the mana to remove it first. Because even if they don't, they will. Moving on, we have a newer horror from the Caverns of Ixalan, one of my favorite sets, Stinking Cave Crawler. For the cheaper end of this deck, 2 and a black, 3 mana. It's a 1/3 insect horror. It has Death Touch, meaning it's a lethal blocker, because you're not swinging with it. However, you will swing with it, because if there are 4 more permanents in your graveyard, lands, artifacts, enchantments, creatures, planeswalkers, battles, you can't forget battles. Battles do exist now. When Singing Cave Crawler attacks, if there are 4 more permanents in your graveyard, you draw a card, and then you lose a life, which is super helpful. That's better hand advantage, and health is a resource. So we're just going to use that as much as we can. He has Death Touch. They don't want to block him. He can block to eliminate other people. We already did Toxrill for the part of the Sludge Monster combo, so we'll skip down to Uchalan. Uchalan is a hilarious card. He's got 3 card types. He's only 4 mana. He's a star 4 power toughness, because while he is a crab ooze horror, his power and toughness is equal to the total number of crabs, oozes, and or horrors you control. So he gives 1/4 for himself. What the funny part is As beginning your end step, you exile one target creature card from an opponent's graveyard. If you do, you create a token's a copy of Uchalan. This is just a graveyard scoot swarm. This thing is hilarious. You only get one at the first, unless you can, use Roaming Throne for that triggered ability to double it. But you only get to take one thing per turn with one Captain Agatharod from everything we just milled. What do you do with the rest of it that you can't target next turn? You get rid of it so they can't touch it. Uchalan is just hilarious, and he just keeps doubling. You got 1, you got 2, you got 4, you got 8. Oh, it's so fun. I love Uchalan. Up next, we have Wharf Infiltrator, probably the cheapest creature in this deck besides Golem. At 2 mana, 1/1, he has a human horror, and he has Skulk. He cannot be blocked by creatures with greater power, which is super helpful. Because not only for his own effects of whenever Wharf Infiltrator does combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, which is great. It's looting. It helps. It helps get permanents in the graveyard. It helps us shuffle cards that maybe would help our opponents we don't want to use right now into our graveyard. Whenever I do discard a card, if it happened to be a creature card, I may pay 2 colorless mana, and if I do, I make a 3/2 Eldrazi Horror creature token. Now, this card is great because he's a 1/1. Most people won't have a 1 power creature to be able to block him. So I hit you for 1 damage. I discard a card, I make a 3/2 I have to block with now, and I hit you for 1. So you mill 1. I had an Auton Soldier, so you mill 2. I had, where is he? Roaming Throne. So each of those you mill another 1, so you mill 4. That is 4 mills off of a 1/1. That also made me a 3/2, which that 3/2 can then hit and make you mill 12. Like, Wharf Infiltrator starts the ball rolling. Like Sisyphus pushing a rock up the hill, it's all going to fall back down into your graveyard. And the final creature we're running is Zelix Sanity Flayer, a 3 mana legendary horror at 2/3. Whenever a player mills 1 or more creature cards, you create a 1/1 black horror creature token. Now, see, this is what I was talking about when I was talking about certain cards don't work off of when it says put into their graveyard. But this one has luckily been errata to mill. The more you mill, the better chance you have. But if you hit 7 creature cards, you're only getting 1 horror token. So you're losing a bit of value, but you do get to target those cards later. You get to remove them. You can do whatever you want. You're in charge. You're setting the tempo and the pace. I apologize for the sunlight. Sun's going down, and I'm next to a window. His other ability is for 1 mana, you can tap him and make a player mill 3 cards. 3 is a great number. You're likely to hit a creature. Most people tend to have 20 or 30 creatures in their deck, somewhere in there. So that's about a third of their deck, which means, in theory, 1 of those 3 cards should be a creature. Now, he has to choose a background, which means if he's my commander, I can choose an enchantment as my second background to give me the colors. But we're not using that. We have our commander. We got Captain Agatharod, Space Pirate. Oh, welcome aboard, everyone who's been joining us and just started. We are doing deck profiles to start our Monday Night Magic off. We're going over our mill deck Horror Pirate Captain Agatharod. We have done our Planeswalkers and Creatures. We're going to move on to Sorceries. Now, first sorcery, hideously expensive. 7 mana, Breach the Multiverse. It can't be played at a spell speed that matters. It's played during your turn only, which is fine. Agatharod only triggers on cards you mill during your turn. He doesn't trigger every end step, just your end step. So what this one does is each player, including yourself, mills 10 cards. For each player, including yourself, you choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. You put those cards on the battlefield under your control. Then each creature that you control becomes a Phyrexian edition with other types. Now, we don't care that's a Phyrexian. That doesn't matter. We run Masculine Nexus. We run other things. Like we're making things horrors whether they like it or not. What's important is that we get 10 mills for an Agatharod to target from a player, or if we have more Agathrods, each player. From each player, we get a creature or planeswalker for free, aside from Agatharod's effect. And then you get a card from your own graveyard as well back, so you don't really lose that much from you hitting your own creatures. But this is kind of a I have the mana, I got nothing else to do card. This is a big play. This is something you could also discard for loot. Up next, we have Demonic Tutor, classic black card. You're just paying 2 mana, a blue, colorless and a black, Search your library for a card and put it in your hand. You then shuffle your library. Simple as can be. You get the value immediately as long as you can still play that card after. It's not as good as the new Beseech the Mirror or Beseech the Queen, but you don't have to sacrifice anything for this one. So it works out a little in that favor if you want to keep a board. Up next, we have Eldritch Pact. Now, this is one of the game enders for this deck. It's 6 colors and a black. It's also 7 mana like Breach the Multiverse, but I'm not calling it hideously expensive. Breach the Multiverse has 2 black pips, meaning you need specifically 2 black mana. Not hard. We run Urborg, but still, if I don't have Urborg, it might be a little harder than Eldritch Pact for 1 black pip. You make a player draw X cards, and they lose X life, where X is the number of cards in their graveyard. If they don't lose from the damage from the amount of cards you've milled them, they're going to lose from decking out. Like, there's nothing they can do at this point, unless they can flash in Thassa's Oracle or something. Like, this is going to end one person. One person will just be out of the game entirely. Moving on, Feed the Swarm. Now, this is kind of the card I think of when I think of, like, oh, how is my card going to get hurt? How is my card going to get hurt? Because if Phoenix didn't have Indestructible, this is a card that's a threat to him. Whether he's considered a creature or enchantment, for 2 mana, you can destroy a target creature or a target enchantment and opponent controls. You do take life equal to that card's mana value. So if you hit something big like an Auton Soldier, you're taking 6. You hit something small like a Bloodchief's Ascension, you're taking 1. But health is a resource. You should use it until you're going to lose, right? Don't just dump all 38, Doom Whispering 19 times. Think about it. What are you going to do? But you should still use it. You shouldn't be worried about your health. You don't win by having more health than your opponent. You win by them having 0. Up next, Fractured Sanity. Now, this is one of those fun secret art cards. Like, it's the hand-drawn kid cards. It's fun. It is 3 blue mana. Each color is blue, making this really hard to cast for being so cheap to cast. Now, this is so totally worth it. Each opponent mills 14 cards. 14 cards. That is a huge amount of cards. That's more than I have sorcery. That's more than I have instants. That's more than I have enchantments. That's more than I have artifacts. 14 cards. That's my commander, my planeswalker, and all my artifacts at the same time. You can't mill my commander, but 14, God, it's huge. And you just target the cards in the graveyard. They don't have 14 cards now. You're messing with them. They don't have 14. Everyone hates it when this happens. But it's 3 mana, all of which are blue. That's hard. If you can't do it, it has cycling. For a colorless and a blue, you discard it and draw a card. But when you cycle it, each opponent mills 4 cards now. You still get value off it, and you get hand advantage. There's no downside to this card. Even if you're not running a blue mill deck, screw it. Just run Fractured Sanity. It's hilarious watching the faces of people just go, 14? Oh, that's my win. You hit my tooth and net. Oh, what? It's so fun watching an entire table do that. And we have a worse one a couple more cards down. But before we get to dessert, we have to eat the main course. The appetizers, the fish plate, the soup dish. We have a lot to get through. So moving on, we have Psychic Drain. In X cost, blue-black, sorcery. So minimum of 2 mana. Actually, 3 mana if you want any effect. And it can go even bigger, which is where Grow Philosopher targeting a Soul Ring comes in. You make target player put the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, and you gain that X life. Now, I said you don't win by having more health than your opponent, but you don't lose either, and it makes it harder to lose if you have more health. Now, this card was errated to say mills, which is, once again, super helpful for a mill deck. Even if it just still said they put the top X cards, that doesn't hurt Nagatharod. That doesn't really hurt any of my cards down here. That's because I don't really have things that say mill in my creatures. It's over here in the artifacts and enchantments where I have the mill. So moving on, we have Reanimate. I lose a creature. I mill a creature from Breach of Multiverse. I want to bring it back. I can Reanimate. But that's a niche use for Reanimate in this deck. Who uses Reanimate on their own creatures these days, right? Reanimate's all about taking your opponent's creatures. And if I can only get one that I milled this turn, I want one of those cards back. It might be a later turn. I might not have a use for Toxic Extortionist now that I milled off you. But I will. And I'll play it. And I'll take 2 health for it. Yeah, putting a creature card on the battlefield under your control for 1 mana and life equal to cost, not a bad trade. Like, that's just using Tenured Marshcaster? Moorland Zinccaster? Moorland Zinccaster, I think. Where you pay 1 and a black to cast a black spell for health equal to mana cost. Like, this is just, you take a creature out of a grave. It could be any creature. It could be a Blightsteel Colossus you milled. Not likely, but it could be. It could be. Up next, we have Ring Sight. Now, this kind of a weird card I put in here. It's because I have so many legendaries, because I copy so many legendaries, and I'm only using a 2-color wedge. I'm just using the, what is this? Not Azorius. Is this Azorius? No, this is Dimir. This is the Dimir wedge. At 1 blue and a black, the ring will tempt you, meaning you put the ring, you tempt the ring counter on someone. They are considered a legendary creature, and they have menace now. You search your library for a card that shares a color with a legendary creature you control. All my legendaries are blue and or black. I only need to search for blue and or black cards. This is a blue and or black card. I'm just going to say one more again, blue and or black. You can search anything. You reveal what you search for, because it's not just a black tutor. The black tutors don't reveal. Any other color does. And then you put it in your hand and you shuffle. 1 more mana than Demonic Tutor, but it gives you an extra legendary creature, if that matters to you, if you have a deck based around that. And it gives it Menace. Menace is always great. If, it happens to be something like my fish, it's not a horror. Nagathrod can't give a Menace. Now my fish is a legendary, and it has Menace, and it has 6/6. So, this is a fun utility tutor I have in the deck. I could replace this with something like Mystic Tutor, because at that point, Mystic is just tutoring another tutor. But this can tutor a lot more than that. So, I digress. It's fun. It's for me. This is the deck profile I've built. If you'd like to customize, if you'd like to base a deck off this, I would love to see it. I'd love to see it in the comments what you thought. This is on Moxfield, by the way. I put all these decks on Moxfield to go over with everyone. Up next, the dessert card I was talking about, Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Now, Fractured Sanity milled 14. It was 3 blue pips. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is 1 and 2 blue pips, and it exiles cards on top of their library until you exile a total mana value of 20 or more. This card is one that makes no friends at a table. No one thinks it's funny. No one thinks, oh, you're going to take something, because you can't. You exiled it. But they can't get it back either. You exile cards you hit 20 mana, and lands count as 0. X value counts as 0. Unless they're running, the new Eldrazi deck with all those 10 drops in it, or Dino's Nest Dinosaur or Atlapalani egg deck with big stompy boys in it, they're losing a lot. You're going through all the mana rocks. You're going through half their lands. You're going through at least 20 or 30 cards. Like, it is hilarious to watch how people just can't play anymore. They're going to lose something, and hopefully something will be hurtful. This is a great way to make sure you can still win, or just make them not want to play and they give up, and then you win that way. This is just a classic standard blue card that you see a lot in a lot of blue decks. Moving on, the final sorcery is the first board wipe of the deck, Toxic Delge. Now, we said Kira protects our entire board, but she doesn't protect them from board wipes, and nothing really can, unless you have Phase Out. Toxic Delge is 2 colors and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, meaning you do have to pay this cost, you pay X life. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn. Now, mostly just judging by the cards I have here. The thickest and hardest card to remove, Toxic the Corrosive at 7. We have Phoenix at 7. If we have a Spark Double on our Nagathrod, that's 7. Just judging by our creatures, if you wanted to wipe your own board for whatever reason, you're hitting 7 health for Toxic Delge. And it gives everything -X/-X. Now, that doesn't matter too much for Phoenix's power. He's now a -3. That's not possible. He's a 0. But he's a -7 toughness. And if something has 0 toughness, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if he's indestructible. He just withers away and dies. So Toxic Delge uses your health, the resource, as I like to explain, to get rid of any problems on the board. But not just any problems on the board. Every problem on the board, including your own. So you got to be careful. If you have a good board, you think you can win, you don't have to worry too much about what your opponent's doing, yeah, Toxic Delge. If your board isn't as good as your opponent's, you're probably going to Toxic Delge then. All right, we have now finished through the sorcery section. So we're going to go to instance. Then I'm going to give my little welcome message in case anyone joins in, wonders what we're doing, and then we'll go on continuing. So first up, we have Brainstorm. This is like the blue draw card. For those of you like who played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or other card games that are coming over to Magic, this is Graceful Charity. But this one's not banned. I don't even know why Graceful Charity is still banned. Bring Graceful Charity back. It is 1 blue pip, an instant. You can do it at any time for the cheapest amount of mana possible while still paying mana. You draw 3 cards, and then any 2 cards from your hand go back on the top of your library in any order. If you have a bunch of land in your hand that you don't need, and you kind of need something to play with it, or you have too much and you need more land, you can draw 2 and shuffle back what you don't want right now or what you want later in the order you think you'd want it. Now, you're not going to want to, remove something like a mana drain or a counter spell or a cyclonic rift because that's protection. But maybe you don't need Kira right now, or Phoenix or Geth are a little too expensive to cast, so you're going to put them back with Brainstorm. And you're going to get a total of +1 cards for 1 mana. So all in all, this is the blue draw card. This is the standard, I'm playing a card to draw immediately. There's other ones like Rhystic Study. You pay the 1 so you can get your draw, but this is the one, you pay it for an immediate result. Moving up next, the next immediate result blue card, Cyclonic Rift. 1 in a blue instant, you return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. This is referred to as bouncing a card because it bounces like a ball from the field to your hand. Now, this only hits one thing for 2 mana. And I said an immediate result, and it's a blue card, a recognizable blue card. That's because of the overload mechanic. Overload changes the text of the spell you cast. So instead of saying the words target, it says each. Return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, thereby resetting your opponent, essentially. They had the mana, but they had to spend it to play. That's a whole turn. They didn't do anything. They just rebuilt their board. They had to rebuild as much of a board as they could that they had built over 7 turns within 1 turn and hope that they don't lose from there. And even then, you're playing this when you can win. But to overload it, it's 7 mana instead of 2. But still, only 1 blue pip, meaning you can use it with Grell Philosopher, targeting a Soul Ring. You can use it with other mana rocks. It is not as expensive or inaffordable as it might seem, just looking at it. Moving up, a very inexpensive and affordable card, Deadly Rollick. Now, technically this has a mana cost. It's 3 and a black, so 4 mana for an instant speed exile target creature. Now, I don't even want to say 9 times out of 10. 14 times out of 11. I know, 14 times out of like 15 times. That's still going. 16 out of 17 times. That's a weird percentage. You find the percentage of times that you will use it, and that's going to be accurate. 16 out of 17 times, you're not going to pay the mana cost. You're going to control your commander, and you're going to cast this spell without paying its mana cost. How do I know that? Because this is Commander format. And in Commander format, you build a deck one of 2 ways. You build it this way, with your commander being the focus and idea of your deck. The prime example of those are Eminence Commanders. Or you would build it this way, with Zelix in a background, or Sakashima in a partner. You're building it for the colors that aren't so bad, like running a Morophon. It's not that bad. You have your colors. But you don't need to have your commander out. So why would I run a Deadly Rollick if my deck isn't based around using my commander's effect, but using my commander's colors, right? But this is a deck that uses the commander's effect. We want our commander on the board, so we're going to have our commander on the board. Deadly Rollick, 16 out of 17 times, is going to be cast using the alternate casting cost of free. Moving on, Desertion. An expensive counterspell, but it's one of my favorites. Now, y'all know me. I talk about it often. I like to steal from people's decks. I don't like interacting with other people's whole boards and decks and everything they're doing while they're playing. It's a little inconsistent unless you're taking everything at once all the time, constantly, and they're not allowed to play. If you can stop them from having anything, you can take as much as you want. In this card is a 5 mana counterspell, but if it counters an artifact or a creature, instead of it going to the owner's graveyard, it comes onto your field. It never hits their graveyard. They can't bring it back from their graveyard. They can't exile it. It's just yours now. You control it, but don't own it, and it's yours. That is super helpful if they're playing something that is an artifact and a creature, like Blasteel Colossus. They're playing the new, not all of the new Eldrazi, because some of them can't be countered. They're playing a Chromatic Ori or a Vidalcan Ori, something that, or their own mirror box, or something that you might want for your deck. They play that, you get it for 5 mana. Hopefully, you're counting something big, so it's kind of worth that 5 mana. But fantastic card. It's one of the counter spells. It allows you to steal. You also have Spell Swindle if you'd like something like that. That makes treasure tokens equal to the mana. So you definitely want to hit a 5 or higher when you do Spell Swindle because it still costs 5 mana. So that one's a little more iffy on when you would get the value off it as opposed to something like this card. Moving on, up next we have Drown in Dreams, another X card and another hilarious card. Once again, I would give you that 16 out of 17 times you're going to use when you have your commander. But this one, 6 or 7 out of 10 times. Like you're going to use it when you have your commander. At 3 mana, 2 colors and a blue, X cost on top of that, it's an instant. You choose one of 2 effects. Target player draws X cards, possibly yourself if you need the hand advantage, possibly your opponent if you milled them out enough and they're low on their deck. Or target player mills twice X cards. You got good hand, your opponent has a large deck still, you'd probably have a mill twice X. If you have your commander, you do both. And they don't have to target the same person. If you've been hammering one guy and he's milled 60-70% of his deck, maybe you have him draw. Some guy's been getting off a little clean, he's been playing cards fast, he's been trying to draw a lot, he's been maybe self-milling or sacrificing. He's going to take a lot more damage from that mill twice. So, you could do that. If there's one person left, you just end one person. He has to draw X and mill twice X, essentially making him lose 3X cards. This is another game ender in the deck, especially if you combo this after Atasha's. You lose 3 draw and or mill, so it's about 9 cards from the draw and or mill. But Tasha's, for that 9 cards, is going to hit a lot more cards. So Drown in Dreams and Tasha's, that's a game ender. Drown in the Lock. This card is another counterspell / removal. At blue-black, it's an instant, and you either counter a target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in the controller's graveyard, which early, probably not going to counter much. You might hit a Soul Ring. It takes a couple of turns to get the mill going in this deck, so you're not going to really use this as an early counterspell. And even then, it's 2 separate colors, so it's not best early. It's mid-early at the earliest. Early-mid game at the earliest. But you can also destroy a creature with mana value less than or equal to number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Now, that's a lot more accessible throughout any stage of the game. They summoned a cheap card, Birds of Paradise. They maybe have 1 card in the graveyard because they played an instant or sorcerer like Adama's Reach, just using a green deck as an example. They are going to lose that card because they have 1 card. It costs 1 mana. This card gets stronger as the game goes on, especially when combined with something like Consuming Aberration. Because first, I cast Drown in the Lock. I hold priority. Well, I actually don't have to hold priority because the trigger happens immediately. Consuming Aberration. When I cast a spell, each opponent reveals the cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, and those cards go into the graveyard. So this triggered. Now I get to make my target. I can counter that spell because I now have more cards in their graveyard. I can destroy the creature because I have more cards in the graveyard. So this is a combo-centric counter or removal, which is an interesting concept. It doesn't work too well on its own unless it's later in the game. Up next we have Mana Drain, classic 2-mana counterspell. This thing is counterspell on steroids. Counterspell is a 2 blue mana instant that counters target spell. Mana Drain is a 2 blue mana instant that counters target spell. But at the beginning of your next main phase, you get colorless mana equal to that spell's mana value. The difference, and why you'd run them, you should also run both, but if you can only run one, you're probably going to run counterspell because the difference is $20, $30. Like, Mana Drain is expensive because it is kind of worth it. That being said, it's only really worth it if you're going to locals or you're going to, LCSs. If you're just playing with your friends, you're playing in a pod, you can work out some proxy rules, you're playing online, there's other ways to get it. Up next, we're almost done with those instances as well. We're going with Thought Collapse. This is another counter spell, a little more expensive at 1 and 2 blue pips. You counter any target spell. Its controller then puts the top 3 cards of their library in the graveyard. Now this one has also been errated. As you notice, most of the ones that say put have been errated, but not all, and that's what you always have to check for. But so yeah, you counter a spell for 3 mana, they mill 3 cards. They now have lost 4 cards, and possibly they could possibly have lost less cards, like my deck, the previous one, played out of my graveyard. If you're curious about this deck I keep bringing up, it is on my YouTube, at same as this stream, Title Fox 35. I will be posting a new deck video every week. I'm going to start going into more Magic content as I progress doing this. But continuing from that little side tangent, we have Thought Scour. 1 mana, target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his own graveyard, and then you draw a card. For this deck, that's essentially a +3. You get the one-hand advantage for 1 mana. Well, technically, that's neutral right there. You played a land, you played him, you played Thought Scour, you get the card back. You had to play the land anyway, so you still have 6 cards if this is first turn. But your opponent loses 2 cards, and you could potentially get those 2 cards at any point in the game. So, +1, +2. It is a good card for the deck. And then finally, another cheap card in the last instant we run is Vampiric Tutor. Now, this instant searches your library for a card, and you shuffle your library, and you put on top of your library, and then you lose 2 life. You don't ever have to reveal it, because, like this other Black Tutor, you don't reveal the cards you search with these. That's why these are some of the more expensive and more sought-after tutors, because they can also tutor anything, and you never have to reveal what you're tutoring. I mean, at LCS, you're not gonna if you don't have to, but you know, with your friends, your pod, you're probably like, oh yeah, I got this. You know what I'm getting? Soul Ring Churn 1. Like, come on. But this does put on top of your library, so you have to be careful of people like me who would mill your library or shuffle the top of it or make you do anything with it. So because it's an instant speed, you can get around that by playing it during the end step of the person to your right or left if it's a Permapticon player. But whoever comes before you, you do it during their end step or cleanup step. That's when you get to search your card. You've stacked your deck. You get to draw what you want to draw. Probably Soul Ring if it's early. Oh. Oh. Alright, welcome aboard for those who might be just joining in. I'm your Captain Tide. You are now sailing on the Tidal Fox. We're going down the voyage. We're doing a deck profile for Captain Agatharod Pirate Horror Mill. Not many pirates, a lot more horror, a lot more mill. That's the true horror of the deck. And the piracy comes from the fact that I get to take an artifact or creature at the end step. We've gone through Planeswalkers, creatures, and sorceries and instants. And we will go through artifacts, enchantments, and lands next. And potential sideboard things I might want to change. You might want to change and think about as there are new cards that have yet to be added to this deck. If you are curious about the cards we've gone over, this video will be on YouTube by tomorrow, Tuesday. So we will continue now with going forward. You can always check on what's behind later. Alright, so artifacts. The first up is Altar of Dementia. Now, this is a card that has a lot of uses, utilities, and is very versatile. For 2 mana, that's a classic artifact cost. Like, that's when I think of an artifact, I think of 2 to 3 mana. 3 if it's an equipment, 2 if it's static. You know, the equipments are swords, obviously. That's what I'm thinking of. Altar Dementia for 2 mana. You sacrifice a creature as its activation cost for the ability. So we don't really want to lose our creatures, but if we do sacrifice our creatures, Hell Caretaker can bring them back. The only other creatures that we might want to sacrifice on our side are the Myriads that come from Auton Soldier before end of combat. Zelix will make 1/1s. Uchalan will make copies of himself. Toxtrel makes 1/1s. And the final token maker we have is a Wharf Infiltrator, making those 3/2s. Now you notice, most of our tokens are 1/1s, right? Well, Altar Dementia makes target player mill a number of cards equal to sacrifice creature's power. So once again, we checked. It is errated. Errata just generally means it's been rewritten to keep up with the advances in terminology for games as they go on. Another common one is cards that said, when blah 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 enters the battlefield. Now they just say when enters. Now I do proxies. My pod's fine with them as long as you have a copy, an actual copy of like more expensive cards, like say Demonic Tutor at $42. I have a couple. I have 13, 14 decks. I'm not going to buy 13, 14 Demonic Tutors. But where was my point with that? I always go off on tangents. When I do proxies, I have to handwrite them because I don't have a printer. I refuse to get a printer that has subscription based. So that's a rant for another time. When I was always writing that errata of when enters, and Magic realized, yeah, it took a while to say when blah 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 enters. It's a lot of wasted ink that makes the text tiny on these Strixhaven cards with paragraphs for an effect. So that's why you want to check for an errata, and that is what an errata is. Moving back to the actual point, I tend to go on these little tangents. That'd be great in a TikTok format. I mean, if it's just a tangent. Target player put mills cards equal to the second creature's power. Now, if we're doing our creatures, and we're just looking at our tokens are either going to be a 3/6, a 3/2, or a 1/1. So that's 1 to 3 cards being milled. Having multiple Nagathrods doesn't increase that mill. Having Stronic Resonator doesn't increase. It's not a triggered ability. It's an artifact. It's not a horror, so Roaming Throne doesn't hit it. So why do we run this if we're only going to piecemeal mill them? Because I was talking earlier about milling 99 cards 3 times sucks. That's hard. You're not going to win that way. I'm sure there's ways to win it. I don't have that built in this deck. I decided that was too much effort for the win, and I decided there's other ways to supplement the win cons in this deck. But why do we run a piecemeal mill card? Because of 2 reasons. One, it protects your own cards. If your Nagatharod is going to be destroyed, say you Toxic Deluged yourself, or they're using Dam Overload, can't be regenerated, Damnation, can't be regenerated, sacrifice it. Ultra Dementia. It's going to die anyway, right? Sacrifice it. Hit them for as much mill as you can. Better usage of protection. If you don't have Spellskite out, you don't have Kira out, which by the way, Kira would counter that first trigger of Ultra Dementia. It doesn't destroy it or anything. So Kira just counters it, and then you do it again. That's fine. You got to realize that it doesn't have the protection anymore, but it's dying anyway, right? If you're being targeted with an exile, your Auton Soldier's getting path to exiled, and you can't get it back because it's going to be exiled, you can interrupt that by once they're done with their priority and they're ready for their spell effect to cast, it goes down the pod, it goes down the table to the next person over, the next person over, next person over, checking their priority. If they have a response or anything they want to do. Normally people say, no, I don't have anything, I pass priority. But you do. Before you lose your Auton Soldier, sacrifice an Ultra Dementia. You're now on the stack above them, so you resolve first. You then sacrifice your Auton Soldier to the graveyard. You make them mill because they decided to target you. They're now your enemy. Make them pay. You gotta teach them not to mess with you. You're just playing the game. You're a silly little guy. You're a space pirate. Don't look at me. Squid face. You've now protected your creature. It's in your graveyard. You might be able to get it back. You might not. But it's not exiled. And they milled. And they wasted their removal. Now, sometimes you might want them to path to exile something so you can get that basic land, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't want them to Chaos Warp anything. So, I digress. That's how Ultra Dementia protects. How Ultra Dementia is actually used in this deck is sacrificing bigger and bigger things to hit hard. What big things? My Fleet Swallower? My Geth? No. Your big cards. Your Vorinclexes. Your Metawork Colossuses. Your Ulamogs. Whatever I manage to steal from your graveyard, whatever I manage to counterspell and desertion and pull, whatever I manage to make come onto my field, I can swing with, I can deal damage with, I can play around with however I want. When I'm done with it, when you try to homeward path it, when you try to do anything that interrupts my enjoyment of your cards, I'll sacrifice it, putting it back in your graveyard, making you mill cards equal to its power. That is why we run Ultra Dementia. That is how you use Ultra Dementia offensively in this deck. That is where I think Ultra Dementia shines offensively in a Thief-style deck, a Xanathar Guild Kingpin Sens Triplet-style deck. Admiral Beckett Brass, anything, Don Andreas, the Renegade, anything where you're playing with your opponent's cards, Alternate Dimension shines best in that style of deck. Obviously, you can put in any deck. You want to mill them. You want to sacrifice your own creatures because you need a sacrifice outlet, and you may as well get a little mill out of it for like a Will Help Rot Cleaver. A lot of these examples are black blue. Black blue likes this card. Maybe you want to use it for protection, like I was just saying. That's why Ultra Dementia's in here. And we just spent like 5 minutes on Ultra Dementia. Great card, lots of uses. I'm not going to go over every example like I just did. I'm just going to go over some key ones. Up next, a different altar. Altar the Brood at 1 mana. This artifact should not be 1 mana. This artifact is too good, but you do need to kind of play early to get the effects. Now, whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into a graveyard. Once again, errated. Good to check. I was saying that you can't mill 99 cards 3 times that easily, that effectively. It's hard to mill multiple people. Alter Dementia mills 1. Psychic Drain, I'm cherry picking the ones that say mill 1, mills 1 person. Negathron mills 1 person. Consuming Aberration mills multiple. Fleet Swallower and Geth mill 1 person. So I have some that mill multiple, but I mostly mill 1 person. This says every time another permanent, creature, land, artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, token enters the battlefield under my control, each opponent mills 1. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to a combo that I've been teasing a little for why this is in here, how this works. Well, not how this works so much as why I have another 2 cards in here. This is kind of why this gives credence to these other cards. Now, I mentioned Hell's Caretaker. You're going to shuffle around the graveyard a little. It's not that effective. It's a little hard to get. You're just getting 1 creature. You have to have something to sacrifice, like a token. What if you could do that infinitely? What if you could just do it constantly, forever? But why would you, right? What do you get after just, I sacrifice this enters the battlefield? Well, Grow Philosopher, if you do that, you can make all your horrors have all the effects of everything. Let's see. Do we even have any other? Keeper of the Keys will make you Monarch. That'll steal Monarch back. That's pretty cool. Mind Flayer will target 1 creature and then get rid of it and then target 1 creature. Pirate Copy, not helpful. Sakushima, not helpful. Sludge Monster, you could get slime counters on everything. That's actually super helpful. Yeah, there's not many reasons in this deck for an infinite ETB of Hell's Caretaker. So why would we? Well, Alter the Brood makes every ETB of every permanent mill 1 card. An infinite times 1 is 1 infinite. And everyone has to now mill 1 infinite of cards. Thereby killing everyone, making them deck out. But how do we do that? This only activates during my upkeep. I have to tap it. I have to have a creature to sacrifice to put another creature back. And I can't target the creature I sacrificed. It's not part of the cost. It's part of the effect. How do I get the infinite? Well, we use Thornbite Staff. This tribal artifact is a shaman equipment. It is 2 mana, and it costs 4 to equip. When a shaman creature comes into battlefield, however, you may attach Thornbite Staff to it for free. Now, Hell's Caretaker says summon Hell's Caretaker. What creature I visit? A horror. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a 6 mana, 2-turn combo. Because you can't do this the first turn. You have to do it during the next upkeep. So you got Thornbite Staff. You equip Thornbite Staff to Hell's Caretaker. Why? Well, it has 2 effects. The first effect is, for 2 mana and tapping, this creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And the other effect is, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap this creature. Now this is helpful because, like I was saying, Hell's Caretaker, that sacrifice isn't part of the cost. You don't tap in sacrifice creature, therefore not being tapped when the creature goes to graveyard. You tap it, and then a creature goes to graveyard, untapping this. So you, tap it. You sacrifice Consuming Aberration, you bring back a Golem. Why? Because it doesn't matter. You now have 1 mill. It untaps, it's still your upkeep, you don't pass priority. You tap it again. You sacrifice a Golem, bringing back a Consuming Aberration. 2 mills. You do that infinitely. And then you play your turn or just pass. They have to draw a card, they lose the game. There's no way around that unless they're running like Necropotence or something like that, and they skip the draw step. But for the most part, that's going to be an infinite 99 card mill 3 times. That's why we run Hell's Caretaker and Thornbite Staff. We can get away with running Hell's Caretaker as a quick little graveyard recursion. It's decently safe. We can make a good amount of horror tokens. But why Thornbite Staff? Thornbite Staff adds nothing to the deck unless we're running this combo. And you might be thinking, well, if it does nothing, why not remove it? Well, the answer to that is because it's 99 cards. We have 99 cards, 33 of them, 36 of them, about a third of them are lands. You got to have something to do with those 66 cards. Why not Thornbite? Moving on. We skipped a lot of cards to get to that combo because we already talked about 2/3 of it. Arcane Signet. That's just a mana rock and a half right there. 2 mana, get back a color of any in your commander standee every turn, pretty much. Not much to talk about there. We're going to do Soul Ring. It's Soul Ring. 1 mana now to get 2, then you get 2, then you get 2, then you get 2. It's Soul Ring. It's a standard card. It's in every deck. Dimir Keyrune. Now, this is a bit of a different mana rock. This is 3 mana. It gives you a black and a blue. And like all the Keyrunes, it becomes a creature for 1 black, 1 blue. Or for whatever wedge they are. It costs that much mana. This one, however, we run because it becomes not just a creature, not just blue-black, not just 2/2, not even the fact that it's just a horror creature that gets menace from my commander. It's that it can't be blocked. So that is 2 mil, guaranteed. Doesn't matter that it has menace, doesn't matter that it's weak. It can't be blocked, and it's a horror. Or, it's mana. You see what you need as you play. But this is versatile, and it gives mana, or it gives mill. And that's what this deck needs, mill and mana. Up next, Helm of the Host. This is probably I'm going to say the heaviest card I run. This card is hard to get off. It's unwieldy. It might be like the heaviest artifact I can think of. Oh, the heaviest equipment. Like, yeah, Calodra Complete's a little heavy, but it comes with its own creature, right? So Helm of the Host is a 4 mana equipment. It is a legendary equipment, meaning you can only have 1 of it, unless, of course, Sakashima, skipping the legendary rule. It takes 5 to equip. It's one of those rare cards that costs more to use than it does to play. And that's kind of why I call it expensive and unwieldy. But the effect is so worth it. The effect is why it has to be that expensive. At the beginning of combat of your turn, you create a token that's a copy of the equipped creature. Except the token is not legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste. Now, I know what you're thinking. We already have that, right? We have Auton Soldier, 6 mana total, not 9. It gives it Myriad. When it attacks, you make 1 for each other opponent, and you lose them during combat. Yeah, and that's what Sword of Selves is for. Helm of the Host is for every combat. You get 1 more, 1 more, 1 more, 1 more, 1 more. And you keep stacking them. They get haste, they can swing, you get their effects, and they're not legendary. Even though we run Sakashima and Mirror Box. And that's important because if it's Nagatharod, you get, for each Nagatharod, the horrors get menace. I'm kidding, that doesn't stack. I would love if that stacked. You have to have an additional creature for each menace. But you get this effect doubled, or tripled, or quadrupled. Whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. That's not a world effect. That's a Nagatharod effect. Nagatharod's the one doing that. And so, if I have another Nagatharod, well, it technically is a world effect, but it is from Nagatharod, and it is because this Nagatharod says, if I have more Nagatharods saying it, then I have more world effects saying it. Therefore, 1 horror dealing 2 damage, or 3 damage in case of Nagatharod, mills 6 cards. If I have 3 Nagatharods, a 3 damage creature mills 9 cards. You see how this starts to stack and ramp? And not only that, but the second effect the third effect he has, when you choose an opponent, that's per Nagatharod. You don't need to double the effect of triggering with Roaming Throne. It's helpful to you once you have 3 Nagatharods on the field. That's 6 cards instead of 3. But each Nagatharod gets to choose something. And that's super helpful. That's why Helm of the Host is in this deck, and that's why it's worth the cost. And also the $20 cost. Up next, Lightning Greaves. We have Lightning Greaves this one because it's 0 mana. I can shuffle it around a little easier. The Shroud isn't that impactful from stopping me from buffing my creatures or targeting my creatures, because I don't really do that. And even if I did, I have Kira Great Glass Spinner. It's already Shroud on my creatures, right? So it's not bad to have Shroud. The equip 0 is why I took this one over Swiftfoot Boots. Mind Crank. Now this one is a great one that was errated. You see right here? Mills. Now this card's hilarious. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. Damage causes loss of life. So if you pay life for something, like Toxic Deluge, you mill. When you take damage from Nagatharod, you mill. And then you put 3 cards in there from Nagatharod's effect. You see, once again, we're stacking up through combat damage. But that's not the only way that we make you lose life in this deck. Eldritch Pact. You draw X equal to your graveyard. Say you have like 35 cards in your graveyard. You draw 35 cards. That's 70 out of 99. And then you lose 35 cards. That's 105. 105 cards. If you lost 35 life, you have 5 life. You're good to go. Nope, mill 35 more. Because you took 35 life. Mind Crank and Millstone are like some of the premier and iconic mill cards. So that's why I run it. That, and it combos in with another card in the enchantment section. Here we have Mirror Box. This is a card I've been mentioning so often. It works like Sakashima. It's a 3-mana artifact. The legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. That's great. There's another one like this called Mirror Maze or Mirror Hall? I think it's Mirror Hall. It's 5 mana. It just gives you that legend rule. It's a little expensive. This one, for 2 mana cheaper, also gives you each legend creature you control gets 1/1. So my Nagathrod goes from 3/6 to 4/7. Each non-token creature you control gets 1/1 for each of the creatures you control with that name. So all of my Helm of the Hosts that are Nagathrods are 4/7s, right? My Auton Soldier is a 4/7. But for each non-token creature you control, so my base Auton Soldier, my Sakashima, my Spark Doubler, my actual Nagathrod that isn't a clone, they all have Nagatharod's name, as long as they aren't tokens, as long as they're I don't want to say a physical card, because tokens are physical. As long as they are a main deck card, they get 1/1 for each other creature they control, including the main deck cards, including the tokens. So I have 3 Helm of the Hosts, Nagatharod, Auton Soldier, and Sakashima. That's 6 total. Each one of them is a 4/7, and the tokens are 4/7s. The Auton Soldier, Sakashima, and Nagatharod are 4/7 plus another 5 are 9/12s. And then, when Auton Soldier attacks, they become 11/13s, 11/14s. Like, he gets 2 more of them. That's incredible, right? Moving on, Stronic Resonator. This is a card I've been mentioning a lot. This is a card that, I keep sitting down in my chair, I keep forgetting this camera, that when a triggered ability happens, which, as we talked about, most of my abilities are triggered, except for, say, Phoenix's ability he gives people, and Girel's ability he gives people. Most of what I have is triggered. You pay 2 mana to trigger copy target triggered ability. It could be the ability of an artifact, it could be a creature, but as long as it's whenever, at the beginning of, when, as long as it's something that happens in response to something. That's what a trigger is. It happens in response. You may pay 2 mana, tap this, and you may copy and choose new targets. So that's helpful when Nagatharod is choosing a target in a graveyard. You may copy that, and you may choose them from another graveyard. You may choose them from the same graveyard. That's why you run Stronic Resonator. And finally, Whisper Silk Cloak. This is a 3-mana artifact. It's an equipment. Equips for 2. It gives the creature unblockable and shroud protection, and it can hit. Because, like I said, this Nagatharod mill is about combat damage. Before we continue with the deck, we're going to take a small break so I can welcome in anyone who may have joined and get a little drink for my throat real quick. Those of you who are new here and just joining the stream, welcome aboard the Tidal Fox. I'm your Captain Tide. For this voyage, we'll be going over the deck profile of Captain Nagatharod, the legendary horror pirate. It is a blue-black deck, it is a mill deck, and it is a combat deck. Not really an effect mill. I mean, it is an effect mill, but that effect triggers off combat. Instead of hitting a million 1/1s to mill, or instead of hitting 5 9/9s to mill, we hit 1/5/5, and then we mill you 5 times based on that 5/5, because it's a copy Nagatharod. We've gone through about a third of the deck, we're on to enchantments. If you'd like to know what we went over previously, this video will be on my YouTube by Tuesday. The channel is the same as the stream, Title Fox 35. I will be uploading more Mage Gathering content and some other variety content as the time goes on. I would appreciate the follow, and I appreciate the follow here. All right, back to where we were with the deck. We just finished with Silk Cloak. We're moving over to enchantments. Now, Black Mark Connections is in here, not because it helps the deck, but because it helps every deck. This is a black card that is kind of just standard now. For 2 and a black, 3 mana, it's an enchantment. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, so after you draw before you play, you choose one or more effects. You can create a treasure token, you can draw a card, or you can create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling, meaning it's all creature types, like horrors. But there is a drawback to this. It's the black market. You don't just get these reputably. You got to pay something. And the resource we're paying is the resource you should always use, health. If you have it, you can use it. You do have to choose some every turn. So if you're running low, if you're in a dangerous spot, your opponent's looking like they're getting a little strong, you're likely just going to pay that 1 health for a treasure token. After you draw a card, if you didn't get what you need, you do need that land, and maybe 1 treasure token isn't helping, you need that treasure token and land, you pay 2 health for drawing a card. If you did both, that's 3 health. And to make that creature, it costs 3 health alone. So you do any combination of them, you could be paying 1 health, 3 health, 4 health, 5 health, 2 health, 6 health. From 1 to 6 health, you are paying every turn. So you are a bit on a timer. But the more you burn that fuse, the faster you might be able to win. It depends on what's in your hand and how you like to play and how your table likes to play, your pod mates like to play. All right, moving on. Bloodchief's Ascension. Now this is the mill win con. This is kind of how you win with mill. You could also try with Dimir Guildmage and which Sir is that? Sir Conrad the Grim. But those are if you hit a creature, you gotta get lucky with them. You gotta set them up. This one 1-mana enchantment. It sets itself up. At the beginning of each end step, not just yours, but theirs, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Now remember, damage causes loss of life, so our menace creatures deal damage. Our unblockable creatures deal damage. We have other ways to do damage. Our unblockable right there. Golem unblockable. Eldritch Pack deals damage. That deals damage. That causes the loss of life. It has to be at least 2. What else can deal damage? Vampiric Tutor deals 2 to me. But if they have black, they're probably also running a Vampiric Tutor. They could play a Vampiric Tutor and have to weigh if they need to search something and get that 1 counter on there. Or they just have to wait until they can deal with Bloodchief Ascension. I hope they draw something they don't already have it. But so back to Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief's Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. Now, this is entirely possible to get within the first round of Commander, the 3 quest counters. You play Bloodchief Ascension first turn, and then everyone plays Vampiric Tutor or something. Or they play a completed spell or cast Phyrexian mana like Gitaxian Probe. This is possible to get in 1 round. And now every card, not just creatures, not artifacts, just cards, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. Now having more life does help you win, but them having less life makes you win. You feel me? So why do we run this? Well, because we mill cards. And how do we mill cards? Through damage and loss of life in combat. What happens if an opponent loses life? They mill cards off of Nagatharod, and then they mill cards off of Mindcrank. And for each of those cards milled, they take 2 damage for each and every card. Not 1 or more cards, a card. So for each card they mill, they take 2 damage. Bloodchief's Ascension triggers, they take 2 damage. Mindcrank mills them 2. They take 4 damage. Mindcrank mills them 4. They take 8 damage. Yeah, this is a multiplication deck. We multiply the Bloodchief's Ascension. We multiply the Uchalons. We multiply the Nagatharods. And once again, this is a triggered ability. It can be Stronic Resonator. Up next, we have Call to the Kindred. This is a sort of a consistency card. It's an aura at 3 and a blue, 4 mana total. It enchants a creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top 5 cards of your library, and if you do, you may put a creature card that shares a creature type with the enchanted creature from among them onto the battlefield, and then you put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in any order. So you get to look through 5 cards. You may lose a little. You may not care what you missed. You may hit a bunch of lands that you needed, but you're putting it on Gathorod. He's a horror. He's a pirate. That's pretty much most of the cards in your deck. You look through. You get to hit. I don't know. That's not helpful. I mean, if you have Breach the Multiverse on him, right? It's a Phyrexian. You get to hit Geth. You get to hit Consuming Aberration. You get to hit anything that says Changeling on it immediately. You get to hit Toxrail for free. Call of Kindred helps you consistently build a board without having to spend the mana. Because as I said, we're a little on the heavier side. We're in the 4s and 5s for a lot of our cards. So Call of Kindred helps us do those and then still make plays after we get them on the field. Up next, we have Court of Cunning. Now, I'm not running this because I have Keeper of the Keys giving me Monarch, so it's unblockable. I'm running Keeper of the Keys giving me unblockable because I'm running Court of Cunning. This Monarch alone was worth it, and Keeper of the Keys just helped facilitate the deck. Together, they definitely make Monarch worth it. They make Monarch a key part of this deck. For 3 mana, 2 of which has to be blue, once again. A little more trickier to summon, but not crazy tricky. And I don't want people to think, like, oh, he thinks it's impossible to play these. No, it's possible, but like compared to playing 2 and a blue, 1 and 2 blues could just be a little harder, especially the more colors you introduce into your deck, right? You're on a 5-color deck, 2 of a single color pip might be a little bit of trouble. But anyway, when Court of Cunning enters, you become Monarch, like all courts, right? If someone else is the Monarch, you become it. If you lost it, you become it. If no one's a Monarch yet, you introduce it to the game. At the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players, yourself included if you happen to run a Selfish Versions deck, you run the classic horrors of having your own cards in the graveyard as opposed to these more modern horrors. At the beginning of your upkeep, any number of target players, each mills 2 cards. Sorry, that had a sneeze. If you are the Monarch, instead of 2 cards, each of those players will mill 10 cards. And we went over with Fractured Sanity. 14 cards is hilarious. It's huge. 10 cards is just as bad. Anything over like 2 or 3 cards at a time is, a problem. And Court of Cunning will hit 10 every upkeep. And you get the Monarch to draw and at your end step. You're still milling 2, even if you're not the Monarch. You're getting a lot of advantage just off of existing Monarchs. So up next, we have Endless Evil. Now, once again, for Alter Dimension, this is making 1/1 copies of tokens. But for 3 mana, you're enchanting creature you control. At the beginning of your upkeep, you make a token that's a copy of it. Now, that token's not legendary. I think you see where we're going with this. We kind of want a copy of Captain Gathorod, or Auton Soldiers Nagathorod, or Spark Devils Nagathorod. Any Nagathorod that isn't a legendary. Or have Mirror Box or Sakashima out to copy, to make sure that the legendary rule doesn't matter, right? So we're making a 1/1 version of him. Does that really matter? Does the 1/1 hurt us? Because he's normally a 3/6. It's pretty tough, right? No. That 1/1 still has all of his effects. It's still a horror. It still adds another multiplier to how many cards are milled. It adds a multiplier to how many cards you get to take. And every turn, you get to make 1. That's a trigger. You get a Stronic Resonator it. Because, unfortunately, it's the enchantment, not the creature doing it. You can't use Roaming Throne to double it. But the second effect is when the enchanted creature dies, if that creature was a horror, which they are, you return Endless Evil to its owner's hand. So if your opponent doesn't like what you're doing, you get it back. You still have the 1/1 copies. You put it on the 1/1 copy, bada bing, bada boom. You're doing it again, and they have to spend more removal. Unless they board wipe, then you got to spend time setting it up. But, board wipes are evil. Board wipes are evil. Don't run board wipes. Or don't let your opponents run board wipes. You run board wipes, they don't. You want to win, right? Go, just eat their cards. Just physically eat their cards. That is a hilarious tactic that you technically can do. If you can get the card, you can eat it. You can call a judge. Their deck does not match your deck list. You might not be invited back. You might be banned, but you'll win the match. Oh, anyway, Hedonist's Trove. This is also, again, a hilariously expensive enchantment. 5 and 2 black for 7 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard. But you want to take those cards, right? But you're going to take one card per turn and only from that turn. So a couple turns in, when you have 7 mana, it doesn't matter if they have a bunch of cards that you would have liked. You probably can't touch them for the most part. For each card exiled, you may play land cards exiled Heinous Trove. So you milled their lands, they didn't get them, they're behind on mana. You're not. You're mana flooded now. You have their mana every turn. You're not drawing your own mana, you can still play a mana every turn. And you may cast non-land cards exiled Heinous Trove, but you cannot cast more than one spell this way each turn. That's fine. I don't have anything that says, oh, when do you cast a spell from exile or anywhere other than your hand. That just means that those cards I couldn't touch, I can touch now. And I will. Up next, Kindred Discovery. Once again, Typal deck, you're running a Kindred card or two. We could have run a Kindred Dominance, the mill card, but... not the mill, the Destruction card. Or Kindred Reclamation, the Bring 'em Back card. Patriarch's Blessing again. But we're not. We're going to run this one. It 5 mana enchantment, 3 and 2 blue. When Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, or as it does, you choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield, whether through making a token, stealing a creature card, and considering it a horror, infinitely cycling with Hell's Caretaker, or the creature chosen type attacks, you get to draw a card. So, you attack, you draw a card, you make a mill cards. Oh, look at that. They hit a creature. Zealous Sandy Flare makes a token, you draw a card. Right? That's super helpful. That's the main way we stop having hand trouble in this deck. Now, is having one way to not have hand troubles kind of a bad idea? Oh, a little bit. We got black market connections, right? We should have a little more, but I didn't prioritize that as hard as I prioritized other things, right? So up next we have Memory Erosion. This is just a rude card at 3 mana to play. You're probably going to play it not on turn 3, maybe turn 2, maybe turn 5. Because once again, it is 2 blue pips. It's 3 mana, but it's 2 blue pips. This enchantment says, whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. That's just fun because whatever they play, they lose. If they play a draw card, they lose 2 of those cards that they could have drawn, right? It's just put more cards in the graveyard, and it's hilarious. We have one more hilarious enchantment after this, but before that, we're going to go to another great Typal card of Reflections of Littlejohn. This is an easier 5 mana card because it's 4 colorless and 1 blue pip. Only 1 mana specifically has to be blue, and I feel like I harp on this a lot, but it's better to get my point across than for have no one hear it, right? Reflections of Littlejohn enters the battlefield. You choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a creature of that chosen type, you copy that spell. Now, if it's legendary, you might lose it, unless you got your Mirror Box, your Sakashima out. But we run enough non-legendary horrors, Consuming Aberration, Grell Philosopher, Hell's Caretaker, Mind Flayer, Roaming Throne. If you can get a second Roaming Throne, Jesus. That ward is a trigger, all right? I've recently learned this, and it's always best to spread the news. You just get into Magic. For whatever reason, you decided my channel is where you wanted to learn this. Thank you very much for that. Give me a like, give me a follow. Come check me out. But if you have a Roaming Throne, you copy it, or you have a way to copy Roaming Throne's triggers somehow. Sonic Resonator. Ward is a triggered ability, and Roaming Throne is the creature type it calls. You get a copy. You call the same creature type. You have 2 Roaming Thrones, horrors in this example. You target 1. You got to pay 2. Pay 2 because it triggered again. Then Sonic Resonator trigger that again, and that triggers 3. You got to pay 6 mana for Ward because Ward's a triggered ability, right? But so yeah, copying these non-legendary horrors, super helpful. Copying these legendary horrors, if you have the ways around it, super helpful. But so for the final enchantment, because we're almost through this deck, this is Sphinx's Tutelage. This is a 3 mana enchantment, 2 and a blue. I'm going to skip the block of text first because the block of text is my favorite part. We're going to go for the funner part. We're going to go for the setup part. So it's 3 mana. It's affordable, right? Well, for 5 mana and a blue, 6 total mana, you get to draw a card and discard a card. Why would I pay 6 mana to draw 1 card and discard a card? I can run Merfolk Looter. I have Wharf Infiltrator that does that. And then for 2 mana, I get a card back, right? I get a creature. Why would I do this? Well, because you could get lucky. And if we know about me, we love to gamble. But it's only gambling if you have a chance to lose. So if you're running a deck that uses the card Gamble as a tutor and you like to have cards in your graveyard, is it really gambling? But this one we can lose, so let's get into how we gamble. Whenever you draw a card, for your turn, for a card effect, for Sphinx's tutelage, your target opponent will mill 2 cards. If 2 non-land cards that share a color were milled this way, you repeat the process. Say this happened in this deck. Say they milled my Jace the Perfected Mind and my Auton Soldier. They're both blue. Like, I have to do it again. I hit Consuming Aberration and Fleet Swaller. That's blue-black. That's blue. They share the blue. I get hit. Hell's Caretaker and Phoenix. They're not lands. They're blue-black. I mill again. Black Golem and Black Swamp. They're both black, but non-land cards. So the Swamp is where we lose that trigger again. So that's just off of our first draw. I want to pay the 6 mana. I got nothing else to do. I'm out of hand. I just got to get you to mill more cards for Nagathra triggers, right? Yeah, you Turgided my hand and I got nothing left. I'm going to pay the 6 mana. I'm going to draw again, loot again. I discard the card. That's fine. I want that mill trigger. I want to potentially hit everything in your deck, right? If you're running like very little lands, you've already played them, we're late in the game, I've milled most of them, I could potentially just kill you right here. I just deck you out. It's super funny, and if you can keep hitting the lucky shots, it's super fun. But alright, so that's been our enchantments. We see how the deck's coming now. I've kind of been going over the combos as they come, so I don't really have a combo and infinite section of this deck. Because I don't really have any infinites in this deck besides the Hell Caretaker one, and that's most of my combos, most of my infinite combos. I have some combos like, Toxrill and Sludge Monster, but I don't have game winner combos. Those are game loser combos for your opponent, if anything. Alright, so lands. We're running 11 islands, 6 swamps. That's about 17 basic lands that we can search, we can do things with. 17 basic lands for if your deck matters. Why do we run 5 more islands and swamps? Well, I tend to deprioritize swamps in a lot of my decks because I own a couple of Yawgmoths, Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoths. It's a legendary land that makes all lands also a swamp. If a land is a swamp, it can tap for black mana. Why? Well, there's no text on this basic land swamp, right? It just has a big old black mana symbol. So, if it's a swamp and it taps for black mana with no text, by virtue of things being a swamp, they have to tap for black mana, right? That's why Blood Moon, turning off this Urborg, this would tap for red mana. And I wouldn't have anything that counts as a swamp, because it's just a mountain now, right? So yeah, that's why I tend to run less swamps and more other colors of basic lands. So yeah, that's the basis of my lands. 17 basic lands and an Urborg trying to balance out the swamps. Technically making this 34 swamps and 11 islands, right? But Bojuka's Bog. This is going to be the first of the utility lands in this deck. Bojuka's Bog, when it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped. So you don't get to use the mana immediately. There's ways around this, but not in this deck. We have this because it exiles target player's graveyard. Like I was saying, you can't target all their cards forever eventually. You can only do it during a turn for the most part. What happens if they have too many cards? What happens if you don't want them to potentially get it back? What happens if you want to run a Living Death in this deck? Or they want to run a Living Death? Bojuka's Bog. And they can't touch anymore. You happen to be partnered or tabled up with someone who runs a graveyard-based deck, you run Bojuka's Bog. You don't even know if they run a graveyard-based deck? You got black, you can run Bojuka's Bog. It's a solid black card, and there's not many reasons not to run it, right? Now, that being said, I absolutely hate this card as a personal level, because my main deck is a selfish graveyard mill deck, where I try to mill 80 or so cards from my deck within 5 or 6 turns and go for an infinite and win. So, I don't like this card. I don't like when people run it, but I like to run it, right? It's in my deck, but I don't use it on myself. Up next, we are running a Cabal Coffers, or Cabal Coffers. I think it's Cabal. I'm pretty sure it's Cabal, like the Sinister Cabal. This is a land that for 2 mana, you tap it, you add a black for each swamp you control. Now, this is generally a bad land outside of a mono black deck, but we run Urborg. Everything's a swamp. This is a swamp. I only have like 3 lands. I can just tap this for a black mana, right? I don't need to use the effect. But I have like 7, 8 lands out. I tap 2 of them in Cabal Coffers. That's 3 land down for 7 black mana. I tap the rest of it for the colors they can make or more black mana. That's like 11 mana right there. Yeah, 11 mana. It's 11 mana off 7 lands. Like, that's why you run it. Yeah, I gather my thoughts a little more when I'm speaking. Cavern of Souls. As Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. This is a super helpful card for any Typal deck. It just got reprinted. It just got reprinted. It just got reprinted. It gets reprinted quite a bit, and it's still $50. So when it enters, you choose a creature type. You can either make a waste mana, otherwise known as a colorless mana, or you can make 1 mana of any color, but you can only use it to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. And that spell cannot be countered. Okay, not him. I thought I put Vermin in here. Weird. I should have. So, Cavern of Souls is your land protection. It makes it so you can't be countered. It's great against blue decks. Green decks, because you're a black deck, right? Green can counter black, red can counter blue. There's a lot of things that can counter you. White has a couple counters now, too, and hate it. Why does everything got to have counters? It makes it balanced and kind of homogenizes and allows for more variety. Command Tower. This is just a staple. You're running a commander deck. I don't even care if you're running a mono color. Why not? It still counts as that mono. Unless you're running red, and then you just run a mountain because you're running Violet Coat, right? But this, you got more than one color, Command Tower. Drowned Catacombs. Now, this land is not considered a swamp, not considered an island, not considered basic, but it can make blue or black, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a swamp, which, our board, when everything swamps, we run a good amount of islands. Not bad. Then you get to make sure you have access to your colors. Duskmantle House of Shadow is not so much mana land as it is solely for that utility. It can make a colorless mana, but we're not gonna. We're usually gonna spend a blue and a black to tap this to make target player mill 1 card. And once again, we checked. It was errated. We're sure that it mills. With that being said, we don't have much things that need mill specific in this deck. Up next, Hidden Cataracts. Now, Hidden Cataracts and Hidden Necropolis are going to be the same card, just a blue and a black. I kind of just went a little crazy with these in my decks because I bought 3 boxes of Return to the Caverns of Ixalan. Because I like Ixalan, I like pirates, and I want to make sure I got my pirates. And this was an Ixalan land. I thought the caves would be cool. It's a little slow, a little heavy. Sometimes it's helpful. You know, it's 2 out of 34 cards, not the worst. But you don't have to run these. These, if you're like trying to change the mana base, probably start here. They enter tapped, and they make their mana. What they do for 5 mana, 1 of which has to be their color, you then sacrifice this land, so you're technically spending 6 lands to use this ability. You discover 4. You don't do this during your turn, only as a sorcery, not in response to anything, so it's a little slow. Discover is a lot like Cascade, in the sense that you are exiling cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. But instead of Cascade, where if it was Cascade 4, you would have to go for a card with less than 4 mana, so 3, 2, 1, or 0. Discover 4 specifically in this case, would be of value 4 or less, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. You may then cast without paying, or you put it in your hand. Cascade also does not allow you to put it in your hand. The rest go in the bottom in order. That's similar to Cascade. So Discover is sort of it's a different Cascade, but Cascade's still a little better, even though you do get the hand advantage, you get the exact number on Discover, because they haven't put enough support for Discover. And Cascade still has, Avern of the Chaos Bloom, and all these other cards. Right, so these are the same cards. You can remove them if you don't like them. I'm thinking about removing them myself. More islands, more swamps. You know how it is. All right, so next up, Nephalia Drownyard. Like Duskmantle House of Shadow, this can make a colorless mana. We're not going to make colorless mana. We're going to spend 1 more mana, 1 black and blue, to mill 2 more cards. We're going to make target player mill 3 cards. Right? I don't need the colorless mana usually. I want to mill as much as I can. If I need the colorless mana, I'll use it, playing like my X costs over here. But there we go. I was wondering why those cards weren't changing. But for the most part, Nefali Gyre and Dust Mantle are enchantments with an effect. They're enchantments that are harder to kill because they're technically lands. Path of Ancestry, once again, Typal deck. Path of Ancestry. We get that Scry. It's a little slow at enters tap, but we get a Scry whenever we cast a horror. So, including our commander. Our commander shares a type, right? He's got Horror Pirate. Our commander's Horror Pirate. That shares a type. So, we run Path of Ancestry for that Scry to help us organize our deck a little better. Now, next we have Restless Reef. This is a newer card from that was printed up in Caverns of Ixalan. And I talked about this on my Pirates. I talked about this on how selfishly I like to use this. It's a land that enters tapped and adds blue or black. Now, this is similar to Dimir Keyrune. It taps for blue or black. Restless Reef taps for blue or black. For a blue and a black, Dimir Keyrune becomes a blue-black 2/2 horror artifact creature that can't be blocked for the turn. It is still an artifact. Restless Reef for 2 and a blue-black, so 2 more mana, becomes a 4/4 black-blue, so 2 more power. Fewer toughness, right? This one's a shark, unfortunately, but it does get Death Touch. But it's not unblockable. But Death Touch incentivizes them not to block it. It is still considered a land. Whenever Restless Reef attacks, not has to do damage, just attacks, target player mills 4 cards. So that, puts 4 cards in the graveyard. Doesn't need to be a horror to mill those 4. Just has to put the 4 in, right? But if it's blocked, if it's targeted while it's a creature, if it's removed, you did lose a land. So that's a little sad. That being said, removals that say monocolored non-land permanent, multicolored non-land permanent can't target this because it is a land. It's a creature, but it is a land. So it's not non-land, but it is a creature. Rogue's Passage. This one we talked about a little. This is standard in any sort of combat tricks deck. Tricks on a stick. This isn't actually Tricks on a Stick, but it's combat tricks. I might go over Tricks on a Stick deck one day. I like Tricks on a Stick. I'll probably do my friend's Alesha deck, Tricks on a Stick, or his Chun-Li. Those are some Tricks on a Stick. But anyway, Rogue's Passage, combat tricks. This land makes a waste mana. You're probably going to use it for that. Like, it's not bad to use this one for that. Because the next effect is a little expensive. 4 mana for target creature can't be blocked this turn. Now, I went over some extra uses in the Pirates video, but for the long and the short of it, you make a creature unable to be blocked this turn. Your Nagath Rod, your Geth, any of your big horrors, your Sludge Monsters, your Toxtros. You make a big horror unblockable. That's fine. If you happen to have extra combats, it says for the turn, not for the phase. So every combat for that same turn, it's still unblockable, right? That's super helpful. But if you're taking extra turns, you have to pay the 4 mana each turn. 4 mana for 1 turn, not per combat. So, that's some of just the other uses for it. But we don't have that in this deck. That's not really relevant. I just like to bring that up with Rogue's Passage. I think it's cool. I think people should know it. Up next, we have Shelldock Isle. Now, this one isn't as effective in EDH, in Commander, as it is in Standard, right? I do love the Hideaway lands. I think the best one is probably it's going to be either Mosswort Bridge or I just forgot the name. Mistveiled Plains. No, not Mistveiled Plains. Mosswort Nexus or Windbrisk Heights, as those colors do facilitate those abilities of green having 10 or more power on the field, just on the field, or white having attack with 3 more creatures. Like you make Soldier Wings, you do Boros. You are an Object Master Tactician, so you can assign blockers, right? Those are pretty good. Those are probably the best. Black's not bad. Red, dealing 7 non-combat, 7 damage in general, pretty doable by red standards. I think this one's probably the hardest one, if not for the black one, to get off. So, it's a hideaway land. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you remove 1 from the game face down. You exile it. Then you put the rest in the bottom of your library. Now, exile is not really interactable. There's now new cards that interact with it, thanks to the inclusion of plot cards and cards to counter cards being plotted. But, for the most part, you're going to put it upside down under this card to signify that this is the one you hideawayed. Your opponent can target it still if they have one of those cards. The Eldrazi got reprinted. There's no Eldrazi that does that. But for the most part, this card is now safe. It's protected. It will be cast at a later time. You just have to choose which card you think would be necessary at the time when it could be cast. Like a Soul Ring under this one, that's not helpful. A a Eldritch Pact or a Psychic Drain. No, Eldritch Pact, not Psychic Drain. Eldritch Pact would be helpful. Breach the Multiverse would be helpful because this is a very late game hideaway, even in this deck. All right, so hideaways come in tapped. It taps for a blue mana. You can see that right there. It's a blue card. It's going to be blue mana. For 1 blue, you can tap it, and you may play the remove card without paying its mana cost if you meet the condition. The condition for Shelldock Isle is that a library, any player's deck, must have 20 or fewer cards in it. Now, in standard of like the 40 to 60 card deck limits, that's doable, right? That's a third of the deck. This is EDH. You have 99 cards. Roughly a fifth of the deck left. You have to mill 4/5 of a deck. And that's where this gets a little hard. Now you could. If you focused everything on one person milling, you could do it. But you're likely not going to get it. So you got to make sure you're not losing like a Fleet Swallow. You can put a Geth in there. You don't want to lose a Consuming Aberration, but you can put an Auton Soldier in there. You can't put a Roaming Throne, but you can put an Uchalon in there. Or Breach the Multiverse. You gotta plan for what you're gonna lose, right? Alright, so we're almost through this deck. We're almost through the lands. Up next, Shipwreck Marsh. This, once again, is a blue-black land. It's not an island or a swamp, so it's not really searchable. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Any land at all. So that's just super helpful. But the next one, Sunken Hollow, is 2 or more basic lands. However, it is considered an island and a swamp. For cards like Cabal Coffers or anything like a Shockland to search for this. You know, you search for island, you search for a swamp. That's why you run this one specifically. And you're going to run a good amount of basic lands, right? We have 17. That's like a third. That's like exactly half. Yeah, that's half of the deck. Half of the lands. And finally, Watery Grave, another searchable island swamp. This is called a Shockland. Now, Shocklands are lands that, when they enter the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you do not, they enter tapped. That's the shock. They're getting you. So, that's all the lands. We've done the enchantments, artifacts, sorcerers, instants, creatures, planeswalkers, and commanders. Some of the new cards from Thunder Junction, I was thinking of running are Lazov. Whenever you commit a crime, targeting your opponent's whatever, including things in the graveyard, you put a 1/1 counter on Lazov. And then you may exile a card from any graveyard. If it was a creature card, Lazov becomes a copy until the end of turn. This ability triggers once each turn. Now you see, if you're doing that off of just Negathrod's ability, you're gonna only get it. You're not gonna get his effect for that long, but you're gonna get the 1/1 counter. But targeting with like Jace Perfected Minds +1, with Geth's ability to target someone from a graveyard, and then you mill after. With Mind Flayer targeting, you know, that is going. See, this says target player, and Lazov clearly states that targeting opponents is a crime. So milling through Phoenix would get you Lazov. So I'm trying to find a spot for him currently. He is where it's at. And then Virtue of Pestilence. Now this is a horribly expensive enchantment, 5 and 2 black pips, but also an adventure. It's a sorcery. Lochthwain's Scorn. For 1 and a black, target creature gets -3/-3 to end turn. You gain 2 life. You can potentially kill a creature with that for 2 mana. 2 mana, kill a 3/3, easy. Now, once you cast an adventure, it's exiled, and you may then cast from exile for its enchantment cost, its base card cost. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a target card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Any card, any graveyard, any battlefield, well, any creature, any graveyard, onto the battlefield. So it's worth that 7, right? It's another thing that's going to keep tinking and taking and taking and taking. So yes, this is my Corsair Space Pirate. Once again, if you don't know who Corsair is, that is Cyclops of the X-Men's father. He is a space pirate. He doesn't really have any powers, but Negathrod does. Once again, he's got the octopus face. That was the deck list. We're just going to re-go over some key cards that make this deck work. We have Negathrod. We have Eldritch Pact. We have Altar of the Brood, Stormbite Staff Health Caretaker combo. We have Sakashima. We have Toxrill Sludge Monster combo. We have Sphinx's Tutelage. And we have the Bloodchief's Ascension and Mind Crank combo to win. This This deck list will be on Moxfield as well as my other deck lists under Title Fox 35. I have a YouTube channel under the same name, and I am working on finishing setting up a Discord and other things. Thank you for watching this video if you're watching on YouTube, and if you are there, please give me a like, comment, subscribe to end the YouTube video. I'd like to say thank you for joining us on this voyage. I hope you follow so you can show up for the next one. Hoist your colors high and fly with pride. Thank you for watching.